Hi everyone, welcome to this first KOS video interview series. My name is Tim Metz, I'm the marketing director at KOS and I'm here with Harshdeep.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us on our first webinar slash interview. And I'm Harshdeep. I'm part of the ecosystem team and we manage the developer relation, technical help for partners and key partners onboarding the KOS ecosystem, as well as growth among the developer community.
And we're very happy to have here with us Vic Bassy. Hi Vic, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, Tim. Hi, Aship. As you kindly introduced me, my name is Vic Bassy. I work with BizDev at a European-based or global publisher, I should say, of independent games called Raw Fury, based out of Stockholm, but with a presence all over the world. I also work as the founder and editor of GamesIndustry.Africa, and also as a contributor to GamesIndustry.biz. Additionally, I work as a consultant for a number of indie studios across the African continent under the banner of batch54.com.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. So how did you end up doing what you're doing today? Can you kind of run us through your career path in a few minutes?
Good grief. I don't think it's particularly unique for a lot of people, but I always enjoyed video games. I was very, very privileged to have grown up with access to video games, playing it. And the one constant in my life, despite traveling an awful lot, Sweden is essentially the 13th country I have lived in, was video games. So it became a natural transition by way of other industries that I worked in. I worked as a football journalist once upon a time. I worked in finance, a supervisory editor for a ratings company called Standard & Poor's, but my passion was never really there. So over a decade ago, I decided to make a conceited effort to delve into the games industry. I began, then I was based in the UK. I approached a local newspaper, said, hey, what would you say to someone reviewing video games for you? They thought I was crazy. They were like, no one plays video games. Are you nuts? What are you talking about? I was like, don't pay me. I'll do it. It'll be fun. And it built up a reasonable, okay following of about 15 people, which for them was excellent. And it transpired from there. So eventually when I moved to Sweden, I had some other jobs, but I really, really wanted to work with video games. So I approached the Swedish Games Industry Association, and I could understand some Swedish, and I said, you know what, Swedish games industry is big. It would be great if you had this newsletter that, you know, spoke about its accomplishments, its achievements, regular updates from the industry as large. And I was like, don't pay me anything, let me do this, this is fun. It'll also give me a chance to learn more about that ecosystem. They were like, this is really, really weird. But sure, let's go with it. So they allowed me to do this for a while. And from then on, I got into the industry, built up contacts, and began to move from studio to publisher to where I am right now.
So can I rewind a little bit for one thing you said? So where did you grow up playing video games, and what was it like? Like what kind of games were you playing?
Good grief, I played video games in a variety of settings. My background and my family is originally from Nigeria. And even then it was simple Commodore 64 games. You know, that for me was just wonderful. And as an individual, I was very introverted. Games was an opportunity to explore all these different worlds and universes. And so it didn't matter where in the world we traveled to, even if you couldn't speak the local language, the locals could speak gaming. And so that's how I was able to build friendships with people.
Nice. So it's really a way to connect with people. So I have one more question, and then I'll give it to Hart. So what does a day look like now? Like what does a typical day look like in the life of Vic?
Well, seeing as we're living in the age of Corona, I
Yeah,
can't say any day any day
that's true.
is typical. But apart from what you would call my day job, and a fantastic job it is at Raw Fury. I mean, we work with some of the best studios around the world, best partners around the world. I work overseeing a lot of the PC segment of things. So I work with big partners like Steam and Humble and GOG. I help in ensuring the financial success of the studios that I have under my umbrella. So I start with that, but sometimes first thing in the morning or late at night, I do some consultancy work for studios across the continent. So morning consultancy work, daytime until evening. It's day job, evening, more consultancy work. And if I feel like it, half time and not completely burnt out, I write an article or two.
Yeah. Are you still gaming?
Yeah.
Oh,
Fascinating for that.
oh, yes. I find time to game, especially now that one is at home all the time. You could probably see a Nintendo Switch behind me there. But like most people in the industry, I have all the platforms. I have a PC. I have access to Stadia, which I play as well. I have the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 5. No, I don't have the PlayStation 5. Let me let me
Okay.
pull that back. I have the Microsoft console as well. So I play an awful lot of games, and this Corona time has given me an opportunity to delve into my back catalog of games, which is quite extensive.
Nice. Harsh, what do you want to ask Vic?
Just a quick one on follow up on that one. So, which is the most engaging game on your phone right now? What's keeping you most occupied? Which game? Yeah, like for casual games or hyper casual games.
When it comes to casual gaming, I like games with a start, middle, and end. So it's normally something with, an engaging story, something that draws me in visually. So there are actually three games on mobile, and I also play them on the Switch as well. There is Bad North, also a Raw Fury game, which is very strategic. I like strategy games on a mobile platform because it's very easy to tap, to play. There isn't an awful lot of involvement other than planning ahead and executing a strategy. Also on mobile, there is a wonderful visual novel called Florence, which is beautiful. I mean, it's very heartbreaking, very emotional. It gets you right there. Quite short, but it's really pretty to see. And then finally is a classic game that's also available on the Switch called Kingdom, another strategy game. So that's what I'm looking at.
All right, and since your continent of concentration is Africa, why do you decide to not move there? Is it some personal reason, or because you're focused on Sweden, European market, or global market?
Well, I mean, my passion for the African gaming scene and trying to support the African gaming scene has existed for many years. But I think I haven't really had the opportunity to kind of contribute into helping develop it. As you say, a lot of my experiences come from Europe and the rest of the world. But as someone who has family background from Africa, it makes sense that it would be nice to see successful studios come from the continent as well. Also to see more people who look like me in the games industry space. So that it's partly personal, but I also believe the African continent has so much exciting potential.
On my end, he broke up. Not for you?
No.
Oh, sorry.
So I believe there is so much exciting potential from the industry.
So what's happening in Africa? What's hot in the African gaming industry?
It's a very broad question. I think when you talk about the African gaming industry, you can almost segment it into different groups. You know, you can look at what's happening in South Africa, which is its own unique and bustling ecosystem. You have really cool studios like Free Lives that has done well and released some critically and well-received titles like Broforce. You have what's happening in North Africa, where in Tunisia you have the likes of New Gen. You have studios that were set up by acclaimed publishers like Ubisoft in if I remember right, Morocco or Egypt. And then you have West, East, and Central, or Sub-Saharan Africa, which is arguably the new boys on the block, you know, that are really trying to take advantage of technological advances and coming up with new ways of presenting the African narrative on a global stage.
So do you think are they developing their games for a global audience indeed, or do you also see games developed in Africa for Africa?
I think to better understand that, one has to better understand the history of gaming in Africa. In South Africa, one could almost say they are at least a decade ahead of the rest of the continent, and that is due to a number of factors, both economical and access to technology, which a lot of the other regions didn't have. But the advance in access to things like YouTube has meant a lot of developers in sub-Saharan Africa are self-taught. They literally go on YouTube, they check on a video, they learn how to develop a game through tutorials, and then they create something. So the level of expectation and quality varies wildly, dependent on what tools are available. However, there is a passion to create. So you see some really interesting things, like there is a game, I believe, from Guinea, a young developer, a singular developer with support from 5 others, built a fighting game called African Heroes. Young kid, I think he's barely out of his teens, and he learned it just by using YouTube videos. It's amazing.
Nice.
So, yeah, the way YouTube has changed the consumption and the reach and the knowledge, anyone can get it from their drawing room. It's incredible. But it also raises a question, that is, how do developers or anyone starting new avoid this information overload that they get whenever they do a Google search or do a YouTube search to learn something? Let's say if someone wants to get into web, there'll be people with different opinions with, let's say you start with Unity, Phaser, or construct a gaming engine. How do they manage that?
Ooh, I can't really speak for every developer or every person in the region, but I think it comes down to trial and error. I think the exciting thing in the region is this swell of excitement at what one can finally do and build on their own. I know certain initiatives where there are people trying to develop Africa's very own console, very own computer. And again, it comes down to trial and error, but it's also, there has been, I don't want to say an influx, but more a willingness to share information and knowledge from people like me, who may have access to contacts or networks in Europe and the rest of the world in supporting the industry. So, you know, competence and skill sets is still really, really lacking, but there are people who were there to help in developing the skill set needed to ensure that people don't get overwhelmed or overloaded with info. There is guidance there, there is advisory there. So far so good, dependent on the region. There is a support system that's slowly being formed in place.
So this is where the whole idea of community comes into the picture, and like having an elder, not an elder brother as a mentor, but there's always a fallback or someone to look forward to, like a young budding engineer who wants to make it big. There's always someone to hold their hand or guide them for throughout the whole journey.
I don't want to say throughout the whole journey. I think it varies. There is business support, there is technical support and guidance. I mean, you have the likes of Unreal and Unity exploring, expanding their involvement in the region. We have KaiOS, for example, you guys also looking to learn more about how to support the games industry on the continent. So there is a willingness to help, but it's about understanding the need as well. I think from my perspective, as someone who comes from the business end of things, what I do is, I'll give you an example. There is a developer that had been struggling to outline and create a game design document for their game, and it's a PC game. So they had a pitch, which was essentially a Word document with bullet points here and there, and they thought that was all they needed to do. But working closely with them, you outline why essential information is key, because it gives the project a focus. I mean, things like that. And that knowledge comes based on experience I've had working with GDDs, and then you transfer it onto them, and hopefully that keeps getting passed on. Because at the end of the day, it's about ensuring that knowledge gets shared so that people have the belief to develop.
So what do you think is most needed to help the industry forward? Is it more guidance and help of this kind, or are there other things you see? What are other challenges that you would like?
I would say three. I would say three things. I would say finance. Always, I think there's nothing you can't do in any region without, a huge influx of cash there. Money makes the world go around, unfortunately, but it's true. So finance would be one, because it is essentially an acknowledgement of the fact that, yes, what you're doing is great. Let's invest in you. Two, it is a support system. And three, no. But by support system, I mean in terms of education as well. And finally, three, a distribution channel, either be it by publishers or a way for the developers to actually commercialize their work.
And what would need to happen for that? Like I mean, if you say like access to finance and commercializing it, does the player base in Africa need to become bigger, or what needs to happen, you think, for the business model to make more sense?
I think in terms of the player base being bigger, that is less the concern, but more the output and the quality of games. So investment in the creation of games, as well as the breadth and scope of what they create. I can almost say that in sub-Saharan Africa right now, there is a belief to create things with a strongly, distinctly African flavor. And that is because there are many such games available. But then the next tier of that, what's next beyond games with a strongly African flavor? Things with broad appeal, tapping into new design elements, looking at things from a completely different perspective, but from an African perspective that maybe European or other global counterparts may not have considered. And I think to be able to do that, you need to have the same level of tool sets, understanding, and accessibility.
Okay. Harsh, you have any other questions?
So if you want to go tomorrow and find the next big thing in Africa, so I'll just share some experience from last year. It is difficult for us to sit here and see what's the ground reality like. The interacting with the developer, who will be our key point of contact for the content creating for the African country and continent. It was a bit challenge, and that's why we were on the ground. We had interactions with communities in Kenya and Ethiopia, and I do concur one of the thing that you mentioned. Finance is something they look after, along with a lot of webinars we had. The key questions sometimes come to how can they monetize better, and how can they stand out. And the second point which you mentioned, it also comes into the conversation, that is how we can help and guide them, to make an impact against millions of apps that are there on other platform. So these two things I do concur from from a lot of things that we discussed during our journey.
Yes. Cool. Was that a question?
No, yeah, it started a question, but yeah, this is something we observed really over there, and that was an incredible experience being on the ground. And one of the community we were involved with, I think I saw an article on them on your blog post, and I was excited to see that okay, Lidikwi works. They are from the gaming community from Nairobi, and they were featured on your articles, and I could see that. Like, okay,
Yeah, I mean it's really cool. The one thing I think I've discovered over the last few months is there is an increasing need for someone who can take the various games that are created by developers in, for example, Kenya or Ethiopia or anywhere else, and help and distribute it to a global audience. A lot of hyper casual games are being made. That makes sense. There is a huge amount of mobile devices. Mobile is the platform of choice across the continent. So, but if you can't distribute or monetize your games in Africa, then what other avenues are available to you? Who can help you do that? There's been a number of so-called publishers that have sprung up now. From across the continent, from sub-Saharan, from the north, and definitely from the south, who are looking to help as well as build solid business cases behind how they can help these developers in getting their games to a much, much larger audience beyond the continent of Africa. I personally think it's really, really exciting. But they are also playing or creating business in an industry that is still very, very infantile, or as some people like to coin it, nascent. It's still very new. So we'll see how that pans out. But from someone who is both an observer, a documentarian of what's going on, as well as an active member of what's going on, it is immensely fascinating to see.
And do you dare to make some predictions? Like, are we going to see, are we going to see esports in Africa, or like professional gamers, or I don't know, like something like live streaming the gaming and a big audience for that? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I believe those things currently exist. I think I lost you too, but I believe those things currently exist. They're taking place in a number of different levels across the continent. When it comes to esports, it is big, depending on where you look. West Africa has some really, really good esporting organizations in place. A new one was launched yesterday, if I remember right, which is an amalgamation of Wesco that currently exists, and it's designed to support the esports movement with representatives from Ghana and Nigeria, and it's really, really exciting. From streaming and online personas and personalities, I would say one of the biggest players in helping develop that scene is Paradise Games from Ivory Coast, which is being driven by arguably one of the more respected individuals in the gaming space in Africa, a guy called Siddiq Bakayoko. And he is someone who has taken game developers to Paris Games Week, to Gamescom. So these things are happening, but
Nice.
but not to the scale as probably what you would see around the rest of the world. So there are a number of challenges now. I think the first thing is to try and document all of these things taking part, because you don't actually believe it happens until you see it happening. And so that is the main reason, for example, of the blog that I have. I can only document so much, but it's to almost legitimize when you talk about the games industry in Africa. People say, oh, what's going on there? You see different names, you see different regions, you see different kinds of games. In that sense, you realize something is happening here. So when you talk about esports and when you talk about streaming, it's happening, but it's also a case of showcasing that it's happening.
Nice. We have how many minutes left, Harsh? We have our strict 4 minutes left. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't asked you yet?
Oh, good grief! I could talk about the region all day. I mean, there is so much. I mean, one of the things I would love to see from the industry is something similar to, I don't want to say Kickstarter, but more like Fig. Fig is Fig is, or was, I will say is an online platform that allowed people to invest in specific video games or in video game developers. Basically, if you liked something, you could put your money where your mouth is, or where your faith lies, I should say. They were recently bought up by a company called Republic that has also specialized in that area, but not necessarily dedicated to gaming. Now, I would love to see that for all these new exciting ideas. So, you know, there is a need to develop a proof of concept for these developers and for these studios. But imagine if you simply believed in them, kind of like a patron for game developers in the continent. You put in a little here because that is what sustains them, rather than a one-off investment from someone who doesn't really believe, but is simply looking to cash in or cash out, so to speak. So something like that Fig across the continent would be amazing. And I know that there is one developer who has done something similar on the continent, out of Cameroon, Kiro Games. They have their own self-funded model where they have an open call to developers, to fans, to the general public, saying, hey, we have a vision. We expect to be hugely profitable in 10, 15, 20 years, beyond gaming, beyond comics, beyond animation. Invest in us for a limited sum. Now, I would love to see that model applied on a continental scale. And who knows what might happen? We might see some really, really cool things from that.
Yeah. Why don't you start such a platform?
There are only so many hours in a day. Otherwise.
Well, just an idea. I mean, you have the network, you have the knowledge. But where should people follow you? Where should they read you? What can you share the URL one more time, and where people can follow you, maybe on Twitter or wherever else you're active?
I am arguably the least active games industry professional on social media. I have presences there, but I almost never engage in any capacity. However, I post regular blog updates on goings on in the games industry on gamesindustryafrica.com. And I have a monthly / quarterly series of columns on gamesindustryafrica.biz. So there are 2 articles, big articles due out from me in the coming months there.
Great.
And Raw Fury as well. So if you want to know about what's going on with the big games for the next generation, you can always follow Raw Fury as well.
All right, great. Any last thing that we forgot that you want to add, Harsh, Vic?
Hey, you spoke about, you know, me developing some things for the games industry in Africa. If KaiOS is open to it, let's do it.
We can talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
No, but I love this format. I think it's really good, and I look forward to seeing how this develops with other people with really interesting opinions and feedback. It's great. This is excellent.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Vic. Thanks everybody for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.